This is podcast 21 with Jay Wong. Jonathan, welcome on.
Thank you, Austin. Glad to be here.
It's been a while since we last talked. I think it was prior to COVID since we last talked.
Yes, we met in person to play some Ultimate Frisbee.
Oh, yes, I invited you
You
to an Ultimate
remember?
Frisbee game. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
that
And
was
then
a
we had a long
blast.
conversation in the car about machine learning and all that. All right, let's go back to the beginning, high school. I think that's where I met you, right? You were a freshman, I was a sophomore. Orchestra.
That's right.
We
Yes,
both
that's
play
right.
violin.
We're in the same orchestra. We didn't share any classes, so I think that was the only class.
No, yep, yep.
And somehow, maybe through the Asian Parent Network, or I think we had mutual friends. Yeah, we got to know each other. I think I was very compelled to your dad-like vibes.
Dad-like vibes. Interesting. People say
You
am I
seem to have an
older?
air of wisdom.
Air of wisdom.
Yes, when you talk, how you present yourself. Yeah, I guess it's
People think I'm more mature
unfamiliar.
than I am.
Yes,
It's just
it is maybe refreshing for
I don't think
people at the same age.
well, like I guess that tends to get me overestimated. People think I'm smarter than I am. People think I'm more mature than I am. People think I'm more serious than I am. And I'm just like someone thought I was like 6 years older than I was, like I get that vibe a lot. And I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but I guess you have to use it to your advantage, right? When you can or whatnot. But I
Yeah,
thought
it's
I
just
thought it's
you.
because the first time we met was because we sat together for violin. You were my stand partner, and then you slowly climbed up the ranks, I think. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
towards
So
first
this is from
violin.
your side. This is from
This is
your
from
side.
my side, I think. Yeah, yeah. And so I think you're very talented at violin. Do you still play or no?
I played in college,
Uh-huh.
doing the orchestra there for a few semesters.
Okay.
Found it was too busy. Didn't do it for 2, 3 years. Just occupied with study, and I actually did pick it up recently. And surprisingly, the instrument feels different.
The violin.
Yes, somehow my approaches it differently. I
Hmm.
think I did it before purely based off of intuition and kind of muscle memory. And now you can kind of understand more of the mechanics, which I think is necessary if you want to get to a higher level. So you said I climbed up the ranks. However, I have a very difficult relationship with my violin education. I didn't have a proper teacher. I played it for 6 years probably without a proper teacher, developed a ton of bad habits. And it was only during maybe the last 2 years of high school where you saw me rise up the ranks that I got a proper teacher.
Uh-huh.
If I had a good teacher from the start, I probably could be a lot better.
Hmm.
However, I also don't think I definitely had the work ethic, but I didn't understand why I was doing it. So
Well,
maybe I would have reached a peak anyway.
yeah, right, right. I mean, you mentioned college a bit. You did orchestra then. I remember like you kind of had a tough time like picking down your major or figuring out what you wanted to do at the start. And so like I don't know, a lot of kids like especially during COVID now, that their school is online. They might have had a rough transition. They might also be in the same shoes you were in. So any advice you want to give them or like things to avoid or you could just tell your story, like what happened that first year and how did you, I guess, quote, quote, get back on track?
Yeah, I'll give you some background first.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, the reality is I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do. I
Mm,
knew math and computer science were strengths.
mm,
So I decided I would pursue those majors, basically just as a practical decision, not motivated by some people do it because they have a specific career in mind, or
right.
maybe they look up to someone and they want to be
Mm,
like them, or
mm-hmm,
maybe their parents are like, you have to do this.
right.
This was my decision making. Math and computer science were my strengths.
Mm,
I went to University of Washington.
mm,
Unfortunately, we have a competitive major system where you're applying to the major within the pool of college students. So that makes freshman year like the Hunger Games, and it's a cutthroat culture.
oh boy.
I wish it was more friendly, welcoming, but it was more hostile to
Mm.
literally you would share answers. You're trying to get that highest GPA, the
So no
perfect
group
scores on
work.
your test.
No group
No,
work.
no, they maybe some groups did. The people who knew did not want to share their
Ah,
secret.
yes. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that made freshman year kind of unwelcoming,
Mm,
hostile, and
mm,
I don't think I don't recommend that for anyone's college experience. And then
mm,
eventually I did get into a tangential major, electrical engineering, and started enjoying college more. And then COVID hit, and then you couldn't talk to anyone. So that basically summarizes my
I, I
experience.
see. I see.
However, in hindsight, the major I wanted to get into, computer science, probably would not have been the greatest fits because that competitiveness still exists inside of that major.
Mm,
And a lot of those people are pretty much in there just for working at the large tech companies, earning a high
mm,
salary. That
mm.
they're not really into programming for the sake of programming.
Gotcha. Well, there
We're,
hasn't been a push for our people, like for us, right? Our generation growing up to do something STEM related, to do comp-sci, because that's where
I
the good
yes,
jobs
yeah,
are, right? Right?
sure,
And
sure.
so I guess for your school system, it's competitive because they only want a certain amount of people in the program. They want the best of the best, right? They kind of believe that the system, I guess, gets the people who are the best or the most interested. But that might not be the case, right? It's kind of cutthroat. It creates a hostile environment freshman year. But the opposite case, I guess, is at Rutgers. Like anyone can go into comp-sci. It's
Mm,
just I
mm.
guess it's hard. It's hard. Like they like the first class, CS 111, right? That they make it hard on purpose. So like only those who get A's, like they tell them like maybe you should go on, and if you get B's, you should reconsider what you do, right? So let's say you're
Wow.
the administrator. What would you do? You want a system like Rutgers where like anyone can go in, and then you just I don't know. It's like you figure it out, and then it's a big class. There's a lot of people, right? That's the thing. With more people, I guess the quality declines because you can't focus on each student. Or do you want a more competitive system, more isolated? Oh, not isolated, but more selective. It's only a select group of people, and they get the quality education, and then everyone else, like, they have to figure something out. Like if you were the administrator, what do you do? Because it's your choice. You know what I mean?
So I don't know what the Rutgers experience is like.
Mm,
My main frustration was I could not take the classes I wanted to take. And
mm,
I don't think that access should be restricted. I found other ways to learn computer science
mm, mm,
because there are much more progressive universities who just publish their entire course online. So
mm,
I just didn't understand why there was a restriction in the first place.
mm.
Uh, they could easily expand the department if they wanted to.
Oh, okay.
They're consciously making it small, maybe for
Uh,
prestige, maybe for some other reason. I don't.
well, I remember from
Yeah,
you
yeah.
being in high school, right? You were kind of maybe you're an overachiever. We're kind of both of us were kind of overachievers, like we want the best grade, like stay top of the class, take the most advanced honors or AP classes, right? Like kind of milk the high school system, so to speak, right? You still like that, or how did it turn out?
I think this question is very compelling. When you first posed it to me, um, my first thought was I was surprised. Like you pinned me as an overachiever. In my mind, I was just doing kind of the regular curriculum. I thought everyone
Mm.
just took everything.
You didn't think you were not
Also
normal.
was no. I also did not choose to take the most rigorous classes either. I just took what was available to me.
Which
Um,
happened to be the most rigorous classes
right, which
available.
because I just
Okay.
exhausted them. I'm surprised that you pinned me as an overachiever. I just wanted to absorb everything, and I found all my
Mm.
classes interesting. I actually thought our high school teachers were very quality. I had the choice of going to an alternative one. I'm sure you've interviewed people from the magnet schools.
Oh
Just like,
yes, yes. But we
yes,
haven't talked about this, so yeah, I think this is the first
non,
time.
yeah, not on the podcast or
No, yeah.
anyway in our hometown. Yeah, we have a choice between two high schools basically.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
my brother went to Magnet, so I
right,
guess
right.
if but we didn't talk about it on the podcast. So you regret not going, or you like
No,
GL?
if I were to trace, like, really know what things would be like if I went there, but I was
Mm.
quite content with GL. I don't think my education suffered at all. In fact, it might have been better.
Well, why better? Because you have to test into Magnet to get into it, or do you like that? Do you like that everyone can go to GL? I guess that, which is what did not happen at your university.
I think I met good teachers.
Mm,
I got a very balanced curriculum, the STEM fields and
mm.
also history and English.
Speaking of STEM versus history and English, I guess the humanities in this sense, there
Mhm.
was this push, and I guess maybe there still is, to get into comp-sci or a STEM field, right? Do you think you were adequately prepared for that from high school going into college,
Definitely not.
or why is that?
Definitely instantly not.
But you see the problem, like you were you don't think you're an overachiever, but you took the most advanced classes. You know what I mean? And you still say definitely not. So like if you're like top notch student taking advanced classes and you're not prepared, what about like the students who are just taking regular classes? Then they're kind of screwed, right? So I don't know.
Yeah. Um,
But why were you not prepared? Let's start there then.
ooh, knowing what I know now, I don't know if I can teach a better class to maybe someone in eighth grade or so. Um, I feel I feel like it's a very different style of thinking. That it's very easy to teach a college graduate. Actually, I think you need a larger body of knowledge. Maybe see how the world works a little bit, and then you can kind of rely on more analogies. And because a lot of the world is structured, and you can just rely on, hey, you line up in front of, I don't know, Starbucks. Okay, that's a data structure. But as you're younger, you're not really familiar with all these structures of the world.
Uh, but
Yeah,
you're structuring the world according to comp-sci thinking, in a comp-sci
yes,
frame of thinking,
yes.
right? I guess like they don't do that in high school because not everyone's going into comp-sci. You know what I mean? Like, so
Maybe
not
if you're
everyone
taking a
thinks
comp-sci class, they
you have.
would, but I just
Okay.
don't think you have enough life experience to appreciate what is the purpose of this data structure. You won't appreciate. Maybe you visit a library once.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
A library is a great analogy for maybe like 2 to 3 data structures. But yeah, we don't really interact with it enough to appreciate why a bookshelf is
Mm,
useful. Or
mm.
there's a lot of data structures in computer science
Analogies.
that are very just abstract and very distant from reality. Like if you discuss topics of trees or recursion, like
Uh-huh.
these are very, very, very unique to computer science. You basically won't encounter them in the wild.
Mm,
So this is also very, very distant from even common sense, even
mm.
even like a layman's knowledge.
Right.
So I think it is a very hard gap to bridge that eighth grade curriculum and that introductory computer science. I don't know if I can do it better myself.
Uh-huh.
I would suggest you actually learn it later in your life. A one-on-one tutor is helpful to just
Mm,
give you all those useful shortcuts,
mm.
because all that homework, oh man, that's not preparing you for the real world.
You mean homework from high school or from college?
No, the computer science homework, it is
Oh,
it is
it's
really not preparing. It is kind of just busy work, and
and there's a
they need
disconnect
they need
between what
some
you
sort
can
of grade.
apply and then yeah, I guess what you can grade, right?
Yeah,
There's that
yeah,
big disconnect gap. It's like what's on the test versus what you actually need in the workplace or the way of thinking, I guess. It's very hard to evaluate the way of thinking, I guess, for comp sci, right? Especially if things are so
sure.
abstract, right?
Yeah,
You're trying to find analogies like to the library, to bookcases. Like I think some people like they don't make that analogy or they're not thinking like outside like
they should.
right. I mean you should, it makes more sense that way, right? But like you do mention, some things are probably too abstract to form an analogy to in the real world. I don't know if you think like that's true or whether eventually you can make an analogy to anything in comp sci, but I haven't heard that before, like that it's like trying to apply it, that way of thinking, to the world. That's pretty new to me. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Glad I can provide my perspective.
I see. So that I guess what I'm getting is the strength, well, the weakness of our system is that it doesn't adequately prepare for comp sci, right? The way of thinking, there's a huge gap, and also even in college, with taking tests and actually applicable knowledge, there's this gap that needs to be bridged, and it's kind of left to the individual to do, right? Any strengths
Maybe
then?
maybe
Maybe
that's the
what?
great filter that you're talking about. It is
Perhaps,
not the
perhaps.
weed out classes, but if the individual has this intrinsic motivation to really learn the concept.
Right. Yeah. Perhaps
Yes,
that is the filter to anything actually. Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I just come
Yeah.
from this background. Any
Yeah.
strengths? Do do do.
Is it good to push for STEM education rather than like, I don't know, humanities, If some like because
Actually,
like
I think both are important. I know
both
that
are
China has a
important?
different system where early
Oh,
on you actually decide one of the two, and then they will
uh-huh.
only give you classes for that set of, I think, 2 to 3 years before you go to college. So they
Why do you think
specialize
America's
early.
better? Yeah. Because
I
people are like, our education system sucks. You know what I mean? Like, we're so behind compared to people in the world, right? Other countries, or like Americans can't do math, things like that. So like, what's superior about the American system? You know what I mean? Why well-rounded approach versus this specialization earlier on?
I would be curious to know what a Chinese person's opinion is who grew up in that
Right.
system.
Yeah.
I think well-rounded just speaks for itself.
Uh-huh.
However, for those who don't have that sense of direction,
Mm,
that they can get lost, right?
right.
Uh, to speak to your point about, yeah, they say American education sucks. What is really the root cause? I'm not sure if math is the answer. You kind of want to just teach critical thinking. If I'm going to point to any class that I thought was really, really fundamental,
Mm,
it would probably be more the English and history classes where you had to read a bunch of information and synthesize it and then communicate it. This is pretty much a fundamental skill that will take you much further than learning a bunch of formulas. I
mm.
actually think, what is the high school elementary math education? It's quite, isn't it quite lame? It's just arithmetic and algebra 1 and 2 is like trigonometry, right? And you
Right,
have,
geometry trig, right,
and
pre-calc,
then
right.
maybe you touch calculus, which is, I think, at least a little visual, little interesting. You can kind of think about, ooh, velocity, acceleration, things moving, and
Uh-huh.
then also areas under curves.
Mm.
And this is at least more visual and more to really the spirit of mathematics. It's actually quite a creative, imaginative discipline. Once you get into concepts of
Interesting.
linear algebra and probability,
But that's separate from calc. Like, I actually think calculus is too abstract for high school. Like, I feel like linear algebra or statistics, those should be high school courses. But then again, you need the foundation of calculus to kind of build on other majors, more math intensive majors when you go on, right? Like physics, or even like, I guess you do differential calculus, right? Then you need calculus, right? You can't keep building without calculus. And then if you want to do stats, it's kind of like a side route, then you do that. Or comp-sci, you can kind of diverge to that too. Or linear algebra, it's easier, right, than like building calculus. I also
yes,
feel algebra is more applicable. It's like
yes, it
system.
is.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
calculus, I argue, is also applicable.
Really? How so?
Um,
You
mm,
gave position, velocity, acceleration. Like,
it
I
is
get that.
not. It is not as applicable as, yes, forming a system of linear equations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
However,
Uh-huh.
calculus is basically the study of two fundamental operators, the derivative and the integral. And knowing these operators is a useful thing,
Yeah, I can't
to
argue against that.
understand rates of change and the idea that you can sum up multiple things, infinitely small
The limit,
quantities.
the limit,
Yes.
right? Yeah, the idea of the limit. But like, even like COVID cases, like you look at how many new COVID cases are in a day, and people are like, oh, it's going down. And I'm like, wait, the total number of cases might be still going up. You know what I mean? But then
Oh,
it's
the
hard to,
rate. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, because if you get 20 new cases every day, right? Or you get 20 new cases yesterday, 10 new cases today, right? That means at least 30 cases total still out there. The number of cases just went up from 20 to 30, the total number, right? But the
Mhm.
rate might be going down. I don't think people understand that. Like, that's me trying to apply calculus to real world, but then people are like, that's just, I guess they don't think that much. And then plus we add in the variable of recovery, right? So how do you measure recovery? Like, after 14 days, half of people recover, half don't, or is it like 1% like get really fatal symptoms, and then 99%, they're like, what's the rate of recovery? I don't think there's a rate on that. So then how do you measure both at the same time? I don't know.
Yeah, I personally don't think that much either. But I like how you're applying
But like that's my
your
point. You have to
knowledge.
almost like
That yeah,
scrape like things to try to apply to, versus like algebra I feel is more applicable, like money, like finances, all you got to know is y equals mx plus b. How much money do you start with is b, and then how much money you make
mm,
a month or
mm,
a week is m. And then
right.
compare that to maybe that's your income line, right? And then maybe there's a expenses line, and you don't want those two. You want the income always to be higher than expenses, right? So I don't know. Like that's I feel like normal people can use math and apply it there, but I
Sure,
guess like for
sure,
calc it's much harder. You know what I
sure,
mean?
sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, when I'm talking about math, I'm assuming a high school level of math
Yeah.
understanding. So this is basic what you describe is basically what I assume other people know. And then you
That's
work
a
up
that's a
from there.
big assumption right there. I don't think it applies to everyone. I think it applies to some people, not everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I describe as overachievers. Kind of nerdy maybe too, right? Not everyone and then some people just learn math and forget about
Okay, maybe there's a filter to talk to me that
it.
uh
Yeah,
that
hopefully we're breaking filters then.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for a comp-sci major, well, you're not a comp-sci major, electrical engineering major, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But you're still interested in studying comp-sci. You're still pretty open to humanities. You still feel humanities is pretty important. Why is
Oh,
that?
oh, yeah. So let me first speak about that story, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
in hindsight, I think I wanted to end up in computer science.
Mm,
I ended up studying electrical engineering, which arguably is computer science. If you look at the stack that forms a computer, the central term in computer science, the bottom of the stack is all electrical engineering.
Hey, I
I
mean,
think
electrical engineering, computer engineering are combined at Rutgers, so
yeah,
it's very
yeah, it
related.
basically is one big spectrum. I don't actually consider them that distinct. And
Mm,
then kind of nurturing this math interest that I didn't know I had. I would not take the amount of math I did in a computer science curriculum as I did in an electrical engineering one. And
mm.
it really developed my maturity and interest for the subject. In addition to a lot of just awesome YouTube channels, like I'm sure you've heard of Three Blue, One Brown.
Oh yes, yeah. You'd
Yes,
love to talk to Alan then.
I think his channel is legendary to
Mm,
like students worldwide. I think he's doing great work.
mhm,
So shout out to him
mhm,
on
mhm,
this small podcast. And then if I'm going to point to other classes I took, I initially thought it was very annoying. I had to take certain writing classes or communication classes.
mm,
And then after I took them, I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. Thinking about who you're communicating with, the audience is very important. And
mm,
then presenting that information is you always want to give like analogies, whatever you need to give the appropriate medium. Is it
mm,
email? Do you need more visuals? Can you just do it um, in a speech, or do you need a whole presentation?
mhm,
Um, these sorts of considerations. What is the appropriate way to communicate your concept?
mm.
Yeah, they're now like investigating what VR to explain some math concepts, which I think is a fascinating idea. Maybe that extra dimension is more suitable
Maybe,
for
yeah.
learning certain concepts like geometry or say linear algebra.
Multivariable calc with the
Right,
3D
right,
objects, right?
right,
Rotations and
right,
all
right.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
And then they're gonna give everyone a VR headset to do homework on.
Yeah, to create the shapes, right? And measure the
Right, right,
area,
right,
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 right. So you can visualize it.
right. So those writing classes would fit under that umbrella of humanities.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're important for just being a human being, and and I also think a lot of that personality comes more out of humanities. There's more narrative aspect.
Mm,
There's more, yeah, emotion, right? Uh,
I agree with that. Like for me, like I wouldn't do the podcast if I didn't also major in history. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that
Yeah.
gives you an element of you need to talk to people, how to talk to people, how to present, you know, like how to have a conversation, how to get a conversation deeper. I don't think like stats would have taught me that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
that
yeah,
balance is
right?
probably really great. Yes.
Yeah, but on the topic of analogies, analogies are good. And if it's trying to explain to someone, it's good to relate it to something. But if you're actually like a comp-sci major and you only understand things through analogy, that's not good, right? You need to be able to understand the concept as is
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then be able to form analogies from that. Because I
Sure.
feel
Sure.
that so much, like, I feel more and more that we're analogizing so much things that we don't actually understand how it works. Do you know what I mean?
Can you give an example?
An
Uh, I
example.
I sense I sense your the idea.
An analogy of this
Maybe I
analogy.
can point to.
Yeah.
I always thought economics was very analogy driven. You describe the general evolution of a market, the supply demand curves,
Uh-huh. Right.
based on an individual's rational decisions. And you assume that that single individual represents kind of everyone inside of the market.
Mm.
And maybe this is too much of an analogy, right? You're saying that, oh, a single person makes this decision, therefore the whole market will evolve in this fashion. But in reality, it is kind of a simplification, and we don't truly understand
Mm.
the network effects, right? Yeah, maybe that's one example
Okay, I thought of one.
of
Stats.
analogy. Okay, great, great.
Hypothesis testing. We kind
Yes,
of
somewhat.
okay,
Yes.
okay, like p-values, 0.05. That
Yeah.
just is the value, right? And then
Yeah.
it's you're
Yeah.
told what to do. Like the whole thing is basically an analogy. It's like reject if the p-value is lower than 0.05. It's like 0.05 is
Yes. Yes, I understand that is an
right?
arbitrary value. That's correct.
Arbitrary value, and then you're just going through a process. You might not even understand why you're doing this process. I guess it's not an analogy per se, but it's just very general. You don't know why you're doing it. You're just being told this is what you do,
Oh,
right?
I think I
or like
understand.
or
I
like
think I
when you
understand.
distribute, right, instead of distributing, they're like FOIL, right? I guess FOIL helps, right? First, outer, inner, last, right? The terms,
Uh-huh.
right? But
Uh-huh.
like, do you know why you're doing it? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like
Yes,
or
yes.
like division, like you think of a pizza. If you keep thinking of a pizza, but you don't actually know how to do the math, like that's not good.
Uh.
Like you need to be able to, how do you say, just be able to work with numbers first, and then you can extrapolate to how can I use images to explain that. But I don't know. Some people
Sure,
might think
sure.
the
No,
other
I
way
I
around.
get it. I
You
get it.
know?
Yes, yes. I think you're
Yeah.
actually hitting on two different things. One is there's an emphasis on mechanics
Oh yeah.
versus
Yeah.
actual
Okay.
understanding. Yeah, and I think there's a place for both. You do need the mechanics to get further, but
Mm.
also you want the intuition to carry you for. But you
Yeah.
can't
Right.
survive without both.
Okay.
As
Okay. Fair. Fair. Yeah.
yeah.
Agreed, agreed. You have to have touched on the subject of machine learning then, if you're in your field. So, and people are like,
Oh, you want to start talking about that? I don't want to dive into the technical details of, how it works and such, but I will give you my opinion on its, I guess, product potential,
sure,
its
why don't we do
its
that? Because
business
yeah,
value.
people are
Yes.
saying machines learning the future, AI is the future, stats is the future. Do you see that as the future, or is it just like talk? Is society captured in this analogy of stats is the future, or like this fad that stats is the future, while not understanding what it means? And the few people who actually do understand what it means are like there's a deeper level to it,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'll let you
yeah.
go from here.
I will. I mean, if you kind of throw away everyone's opinions
Okay,
and
okay, let's do that first.
and kind of just focus on what is the technology. It
Mm,
is it is literally just a matrix, and then you form a stack of matrices, and then, very important, you're going to put a hockey stick function between each matrix, and that is machine learning.
now
That is.
that's pretty technical, I would think.
You think that's technical? That's probably the simplest explanation I can give.
That's from a
um
math perspective, I think. Yeah, I don't know what the hockey stick is, but
oh, just think of an absolute value function. But you flatten one side to 0.
Why do you do that? Why put things in matrix, you know?
Why the hockey stick or why the
Yeah.
matrix?
Why hockey stick? Why matrices? You know, I thought like,
Oh,
and
okay, okay.
this might be the business side of things. You know, like I was told how I was exposed to machine learning is like you're trying to predict the future with the given data you have. You have a given data set, right? And you
Okay.
divide this data set into the data you use to train the machine, and then the
Okay,
data you can use
okay.
to test.
If you do not want to talk about any of like any technical, like no math vocabulary whatsoever, then yes, you can think of it as a black box. That black box is your product. That's your product.
But you
This
see
is
what I
what,
mean with analogies here now? You know,
yes,
like I don't
yes.
actually know the math. I just know
Yeah,
like
I
this
tried to
general
explain the
concept.
math.
Right. You see the disconnect now? So you actually have a deeper knowledge of what machine learning is than I do. I only know it through analogies. I don't actually know the matrices and stuff
Sure. Yeah,
behind
we
it.
can discuss it offline.
Yeah.
I
We
just
don't
don't want
want
to
to.
bore people.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, but you see that's my point. That actually is the analogy talk right there. I only understand it through data you
Okay.
have to train the machine, and
So,
then data you test it with, and then you apply it to real world data. You know, so
right.
that,
So we're
that
victim to our to our own observation.
I'm victim to the own. Well, I knew this was going on. I knew like I'm kind of like analogy based rather than actually know the what's going on.
Mhm.
But I think you have a deeper understanding. Well, yeah, we could talk after podcast. But let's talk about the social aspects of it, right? Machine learning. It can
Yeah, right,
AI
right.
can predict things better than humans can, right? There's that like famous example of Target, right? Sending
I will
uh
first provide, so I honestly I don't think you can really forecast if it is the future or not without a technical understanding. However, I will give you a
mm.
flavor of what it can do, and then
You do decide what's gonna happen.
right, and then maybe some more context, and
Okay.
then I think you'll get the spirit of it. So, what can it do right now? If you're going to summarize this technology and that separates it from anything before, it can work with data that is very complex. So, that is talking about text documents, that's talking about images. And if you want to be creative, you can say, oh, self-driving cars. And you can be like, oh, yeah, LiDAR. That's like point clouds. So these are different
Mm.
forms of complex inputs. And when I say complex, that's code for high dimensional. We did.
Right.
We
So like, yeah, not 2 by 2 matrix, but like n
right,
by n, right? Greater
much
than
more
2.
like arbitrarily large. Exactly. And
Mm.
us three-dimensional beings just beforehand could not really make any progress processing any of these types of inputs. But
Mm.
now we have this new breakthrough technology that just learns all the nuances between all of the, all the different dimensions. Now I'm
Mm.
breaking back into math to
Right.
basically do whatever you want.
Mm.
So it is very good at processing in high dimensions. Basically, things that we don't understand, it can do well, which is why it's magic. Some very real examples of how it's used is I think Google Pixel now has a feature where you can give it a photo. You don't like the trash can in the background. You want to paint it out. So
Mm.
you're going to draw over the trash can, and then the machine learning algorithm will interpolate the background to create something organic.
Mm.
And this is like, you could not possibly imagine something like this before machine learning. Now you have this magic machine that works on high dimensional inputs
Mm.
and can naturally interpolate this region.
Right.
So now that I've said high dimensional, what else? What else do you want to transform? It's been done. Every single researcher in every single field has thrown this at their complex problems. So
Mm.
if you think physics, I don't understand fluid flow. Okay, throw a machine learning algorithm at it. It's going to predict how the particles of a fluid move better than any physics algorithm we have. We
Mm.
have financial data. Okay, it's this random stochastic thing. I don't understand it. So throw in a machine learning algorithm. Okay, it learns all the nuances between all the signals, and you get like this great prediction of, I don't know, what is a good portfolio or not.
Mm.
So that's three examples of working
Right.
on high dimensional inputs.
Mm.
You can use self-driving cars, right? And,
Yeah.
oh, lidar clouds and stuff like that. That's a more complex example. I see. So this is kind of the business value of machine learning. It can tackle problems that we couldn't solve before.
Mm.
Now it has several weaknesses. It requires a lot of money to make this type of model, to collect the data, to train the model. It takes like sometimes entire day to an entire month to literally
Mm.
look at all the examples in your data set
Mhm.
to get this black box working. And you know that compute time is not cheap, and they run it on the most expensive computers in the cloud, and it
Mm.
still takes like weeks to months. How
Mm.
many companies can afford this? Not there's not many. So it's actually quite a higher barrier to entry. You don't see it used by every single company.
Mm.
Um, yeah, they have this notion of a data pyramid where you can't even do any intelligent algorithm unless you have this data, this large pool of data and infrastructure.
Mm.
You need computers to store all of this.
Right.
Um, so it's a pyramid. You actually need all of that support first before you hire the machine learning engineers to do to do anything smart.
Gotcha.
Um,
You think eventually, like, we're gonna be too dumb compared to machines? Don't need to work anymore?
no, yeah. So these things are quite dumb. They're only going to work on the data you give it,
Mm.
which yeah. So it's very useful for these very niche applications, right?
Right.
Getting a
Right.
better portfolio, styling an
Mm.
image. I don't know what the other example was. This is, and it is very probabilistic. So the output is actually not this guaranteed 100% will
Mm.
be correct all the time, which
Right.
is another reason why it is maybe not. Yeah, you're limited to what kind of products you can produce due to this ambiguity
Mm.
factor. Yeah, yeah. So anything safety critical, for instance, that's kind of the controversy between the self-driving cars. Are you really going to trust the algorithm that is
Mm.
just totally probabilistic? It is kind of like a religion, if you're going to trust it or not. Uh,
Interesting. That's the
yeah.
same problem in stats too. It's like, what is 95% probability, right? There's the frequentist belief that it's like 95 out of 100 times something occurs, right? That's what 95% probability is. So if you do this experiment 100 times, 95% of the time, this is going to happen, right?
Mhm.
But then it's like, we only live in one world. So if you apply that to like a presidential election, we only have one election. Like, who cares about the other 99 times that an election occurs? There's only this one, right? So then
Yeah,
there's the
yeah.
Bayesian approach. That's like the other side thing. It assigns a probability like 95% chance candidate A will win. But then the critique of that, I guess, is
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
well, how do you assign a probability to that? You know, what I mean, what if it doesn't occur? You know, what does
Ah,
that mean,
I
right?
see. I see. Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, that's generally the two main approaches of statistics, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
I am familiar. Well, frequentist I don't understand as well, and I think, admittedly, every single stat student does not really understand that.
Mm.
It's quite hard.
That's why people
Um,
don't understand confidence intervals. There's actually not 95% chance this mean will
yeah, yeah, yeah.
occur. It's like 95 confidence intervals will contain this mean, and
Oh,
then five will.
oh.
Yeah, too much, right?
It, yeah, I think there's a lot of structure, a lot of assumptions around that frequentist model that
Yes.
fit certain scenarios. I think it's very appropriate for, I don't know, something like a clinical trial where
Mm,
all those trials are built in.
mm,
So
mm.
maybe anything experimental. Whereas I think Bayesian is much more flexible. It is just
It's making a
accumulating
comeback. Yes,
logic
yes. All right.
and then updating your expectation, right?
Yes, that is how the Bayesians are advocating their approach and
Yeah,
taking
yeah,
over.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, they're making
yes.
a comeback because it used to be frequentist was the popular way of doing things in 1900s. I guess now it's switching back to Bayesian. But you talked about like believing this, almost like a religion. You're the first person I'm interviewing from high school. Just purely, I know you just from high school. Like previously, most people I interview are from church. So I
Mhm,
guess we
mhm.
live in a very secular world today, right? Like, religion's not looked too highly upon, or if it is looked highly upon, it's kind of like in the background, soft spoken, right? It's just your personal belief with God, right? Your personal relationship
Mm.
with God. It's not very something you would preach anymore, I feel, right? So what do you think
Interesting.
about
Yeah.
religion, versus like God, are these two together for each other, or they're against each other?
Ooh. Um, I feel like I don't fully understand the question. Well, I think certainly God is part of religion. Uh,
Mm,
they're they're associated. I don't fully understand it. When you say religion, I think of a bunch of examples of religion, and
mm.
then God is one of them,
But which
right?
one is it? Which religion, or are all religions worshiping the same God is just through different means based on cultural background or different
Oh,
things like that?
interesting.
You know what I
Oh,
mean?
interesting. I would need to know more about
Each
what
religion.
right each religion. However, I think they are derived from a
Mm.
common base. No, they share a lot of overlap in their books, right?
Yeah.
Although
Well, some
they,
of them,
they
some of them.
right, and then they diverge in certain parts,
Mm.
and then this creates a lot of conflict.
You're right. And so some people are saying like we've reached a place where we should stop like having religion because religious people tend to fight a lot, Like in I don't know, within Islam there's two sects, right? The Sunni and the Shiites, right? Iran is Shiite mostly, and then the other, mostly every other like Arab country is Sunni, especially Saudi Arabia, right? And
Mm,
so then they
mm,
clash, right? And
mm,
that's just within Islam. Then there's the Jewish people, right, in Israel, and then the Muslim people in general, and then they clash over Israel.
mm,
And
mm.
then that's not even getting Christians involved in the history of crusades, holy wars waged like against Christians, right, between Catholics, Protestants. So some people think religion does more harm than good, And then in the midst of
Ah,
all this violence, killing, all that, where's God? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
sure, sure, sure.
and especially I kind of
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of evidence.
yeah.
There's a lot of evidence opposing it, huh?
What's up? Like in the secular age today, right? Where like machines are can know intuitively better than us. Of course, it's still very nuanced, right? Just certain things they know better than us. Some people are like, well, if the things we create are better than us, like
Mhm.
what's the role of humans? What's the purpose of like us being here? And is there a point to why turn to God? You know what I mean? Or why be part of a group or a religion?
Uh wow. Okay. I actually think I do have strong opinions about the church.
Mm,
Because I don't actually think it exists to actually practice in the religion, said religion. I have been to Christian churches, but I would be bold enough to say this is common across all churches, that they kind of exist so that people have a community to go to.
mm.
Maybe they don't really engage so deeply with the subject matter that they're claiming to study. And I find that yeah, it is maybe just a social thing than actually following, yeah, your
Does it
religion. In
touch
fact, I
this?
observe that their personalities, the way they carry themselves, sometimes conflict, maybe more often than not
Uh-huh,
conflict.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and I've had, I feel like, very uncomfortable conversations or interactions where I feel like there's this
Inner conflict
yeah, there's this conflict that shouldn't exist. It's like,
between
ah,
people in yourself, between like religious groups. Like when you say talk, or you're talking about this invisible conflict, where is it
I
located?
feel like people aren't being honest to themselves,
I
or
see.
or they don't know what truth is,
But they try to speak it or say
right?
like this is truth
Or
or
they claim
assert
to
it.
know the truth, right? I don't know. I don't know.
But I know, but like it's not, you don't see it in practice. It's kind of just talk, right? They talk the talk,
Sure,
but they don't
sure,
walk
sure,
the
sure,
walk,
sure, sure, sure,
right?
sure.
And it's like they're almost like hiding behind, they're still human just like the rest of us, but they're hiding behind the spiritual guise of I know more or I am better.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I see.
I think there's a sense of that.
Do you think we still need religion then? Or you think God's still out there for you personally?
I think it is. Uh, ooh. So part of being a Christian is that you won't understand how God
Uh,
thinks and how He acts. So the
that's the
things that
faith
happen.
aspect, right?
Right, right. So to say, for me to apply logic and say, oh, all these terrible
Mm,
things happen. Why does He let it happen? Well, so we can't
just can't
understand.
understand.
We can't. We
Uh-huh.
don't have those tools to understand. So
Mm,
I won't tread there.
mm,
Um, for does it exist in my life? I think it is subjective. It is
mm,
like and temperamental. It depends on kind of your current life context,
mm.
whether how strong a faith you decide to be.
Right.
Um,
So I actually had to talk about with Alan about this. It's like not conflict, but the relationship between faith and reason. Like
mm,
faith is like belief in things without evidence, right? You can just believe it without having to see it, right? And
mm.
then the reasoning approach is like logic based, right? And so I guess especially if you're a Christian, there's this conflict between the two. Because
Oh,
on one
definitely,
hand, you have to
definitely.
take things by faith. On the other hand, if you take things completely by faith, you're more likely to kind of like believe in conspiracy theories or like, like just superstition, it's the reason aspect is just as important, I feel. But you can't be
Hmm.
completely reason based because there's just some things you just have to take by faith,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I guess I'm still trying to also like reconcile these two, if it's even
Yes, yes,
possible. Because some people
yes.
like in church say I'm too logical. I'm still trying to think through God. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just never be able to do it. On the other hand, talk to my professors, they're just like, well, what you believe in, it's kind of like what you're saying. Do you actually believe what you believe in, or is it just a social thing for you? Right? Or is it just
Mhm.
something you say and it doesn't really apply to you, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
so is it a dichotomy? I don't know. This conflict it's really
Yeah, yeah.
bothersome, I think. But
Yes,
it's like,
yes.
is it worth it to go through that? Because some people are just like, well, screw it all, right? Just no God, simple answer, done deal, right? No religion solves all the religious issues. So
No, I definitely relate to that conflict.
mm.
Probably
still
the
still
best
figuring
thing you
out,
can
right?
do is probably just go to someone who's knows more.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So I will say that I'm not no spiritual expert, right? But
Well,
I
me
think
neither.
I think there is merit in following it because I think it does build character in that you will have some sort of humility. You don't have a lot of control and you don't understand what is going on, and that is
Mm,
fine. And also, I'm sure it's just a great code of ethics, whatever
mm,
religion you're following. So I do think there is merit.
I
I
see. I
just
see.
yeah, making you a better person, more whole, more fulfilled.
That's what gives some people a sense of purpose or like a backbone to standing in life.
Mhm.
Right. We live in a world where it's mostly driven like by narrative. It's like, well, you be you, right? You live your life. You try to figure out your purpose in life. I think that most people used to hold like God or a spiritual matter at the sense of purpose in life. I don't know if that's still the case anymore for the majority of people, but the sense of purpose. Some people obtain it through secular means, maybe comp-sci is their goal, to master machine learning. Have you arrived at a sense of purpose yet, or still figuring it out?
I don't have a straight answer, so I must not. However, I wonder if it's the right question to ask. Uh, do we need a purpose or something?
Mm,
Or should we
interesting.
even be seeking one? I don't know. I don't
I
know the
see.
answer.
I see.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I'm
Gotcha.
trying to be open-minded.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Because if you don't know, you don't know, right? Don't assert, right, that you know
Mhm.
something when you don't know. Maybe, yeah, maybe we make up our purpose as we go, right? I I
Or
always feel,
stumbles in our laps or
yep, it
I don't
stumbles,
know.
right, as you live, and then you then you see it in hindsight or something like that. So I don't know either. But I think that, I don't know, with regards to doing this podcast at least, right? I'm like, I was thinking about as I coming up with a list of people to talk to, right? You came up early on because like we still keep in touch after high school. I don't keep in touch with a lot of people from high school. I'm gonna try to change that with the podcast, of course, but I feel that,
Hey,
yeah,
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot like once you graduate from high school, you just everyone goes their separate ways, and then you don't know what becomes of people. And so I don't, but you didn't do that, like you invited me to your house for barbecues, right? Before COVID happened. But kind of kept in touch, there was that one Frisbee game. I invited you to.
Oh wow, that
And
was
so
super fun.
thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah,
No,
invited
wait,
me to your house.
do you remember when we took like a car ride to like, I don't know, an hour out and we participated in a frisbee tournament?
I guess it was in Piscataway or something, right?
Right,
I think it's
Piscataway.
super hot. Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
always super
No,
hot when we
I
play.
always thought
Yeah.
I thought that was a blast. Like,
That was a blast. Maybe we gotta do more then. Yeah.
yeah, I loved feeling sore for a week.
Oh,
After.
okay, okay. We definitely gotta do keep that.
That means you had a good time when you were out there.
Yeah, right. You gotta work out. And
But
so,
yeah, yeah, you're very welcome. I don't know. I always gravitated to your personality. So uh
well, thank you for
yeah.
that. So yeah, I'm still, I guess I'm still trying to figure out my purpose too, and also trying to use time I have to kind of keep in touch with people. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna become of this podcast and whatnot, but
So you mentioned we'll talk about your podcast experience on the podcast.
sure.
So
You want to go meta podcasting? Okay.
how is your podcast experience?
Well, I love like talking to people, like getting to talk with you. That's the best part. It's the actually talking with people, reconnect, and
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
deeper stuff. Especially, I think for you, you have a fresh perspective because you're not. I didn't know you through church, right? Most of the people I've interviewed so far I knew through church, so I kind of get a fresh perspective from you, and I want more of that as I
Hey,
keep on
fun.
going. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I'm very behind in the editing. So the rule of
Sure.
thumb I
Sure.
use is every hour I record on the podcast, it takes 2 hours to edit.
Really?
Cause
Really?
yes,
I haven't done any editing
well,
whatsoever.
because like I mean, yeah, I could just post like what we do here and that's it, right? But we have a lot of pauses in between what we talk, right? Sometimes we have
Okay.
a lot of filler words or we're thinking. And for
Mhm.
YouTube, like it's not good to have just like silence. You know what I mean? Otherwise people get
Yeah,
bored
yeah,
and
yeah,
just log
yeah.
off. So you
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to you have to create the illusion almost that it's a constant flowing conversation when it's actually isn't. We've had awkward pauses or like we don't actually have an answer, so we got to think about it, and that's
Mhm.
normal, right? I've
Yeah, you
had,
should think about it.
yeah, you shouldn't just say things, but I guess sometimes people get the impression that, oh, everyone Austin's invited on is an expert at talking, and I'm like, no, that's not the case at all. I just edited it to make it look that way, or like it needs to sound
Ah,
that way because otherwise people get bored. I hope I don't give people the wrong impression. Like social media, it's like you apply a certain filter to you to make you
yeah,
look
yeah,
better.
yeah,
Like
sure.
I don't want to create that illusion that like we're all experts, because the whole reason is the whole one of the main points behind doing this is just these are people I know for like just normal people. This isn't like I'm interviewing celebrities like Joe Rogan or someone. This is just the
Mhm.
normal layman, what the layman thinks. I'm a layman too, so that's it. But then I guess like by editing to kind of create the optimal like YouTube podcast or video, I create the illusion that we're all
Sure,
perfect
sure,
beings, which is not true. So
sure.
yeah,
That's okay. Interesting. That's interesting. That's how you're taught. I'm curious of what you've
the whole
maybe.
process.
No, not the process of creating it, but
Mm.
is there anything surprising about your guests or things that you've learned about yourself that you wouldn't have known before doing the podcast?
That's a good question. Consistency is something I think I underestimated. I think for podcasts 1 through 18, I was pretty consistent. I'm just going to do this every week. Just keep at it. And then after 18, I just kind of stopped. I'm like, I'm going to take a break. This is too much. And I've been taking a break for like the past 2 to 3 weeks. So it's hard to start up again. So like
uh,
going forward, I think I need to keep at it.
okay,
It's you just keep
okay.
at it. You just have to put aside that time. But then it's like, could you be using this time to do other stuff, better stuff? Well, in my mind right now, in my life, I don't like. This is the best way of like reaching out to people, at least having a deep conversation. Because like, I guess the other reason I did the podcast is that in group settings, it's very hard to have a deep conversation, right?
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes.
deep conversations only really occur like one-to-one settings, because like in a group, you don't know who gets offended, you know how deep you could go. You don't want one person to get bored, and so there's this group dynamic that makes it hard to go deep. But in podcasts, it's just you and me, right? So we just talk as we do. And so I guess I've gotten to know more about each person I interview in a deeper way.
Okay.
So I guess that's
Yeah.
something I learned. But I don't think I've done enough yet. So you're 21st, right? I hope we could do
Yeah.
more. Like for each
Yeah.
person,
Sure.
like you're just 21, we could do 21.1, 21.2, and we just keep going with our thing. And we could do a completely different format than other people,
That's very interesting.
you know? And so we do that. And I feel that again, like I said, I've mostly talked with people from church. And so maybe there's a bias there, you know, everyone's thinking like me. As I reach out to
Mm, mm.
people from high school,
Oh,
maybe we'll
oh.
get a different perspective, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah.
yet. It's trying to break out of a bubble in a way.
I would listen to your other ones.
Okay, so yeah, go. I mean,
Wait,
and go for it.
do you think the people you interview at church are representative? Like I could just watch one and then that's how everyone thinks
No, I
at
don't
your
think so.
church?
I
No,
don't
you
think
don't think
so.
so.
I think
So
each
you do kind of gain a little from each person.
a little from each person, and then also it's like each person has a different like thing they want to focus on, you know what I mean? Like it's just wherever the conversation leads. Like with Raymond, I love what you talked about Star Wars, you know, like that's not church related. We talked about economics, you know. Actually, with all the church people I've talked to, like sometimes we never talk about church at all. It's just like things outside how life going, inflation, you know. We also have talked about the podcast on the podcast.
Sweet,
So
sweet.
yeah, that's something too. Or like also purpose of life. That's something I'm trying to figure out from people too. Purpose, like, is there a purpose? You know, do we just make it up as we go? That's something I've asked each person I'm curious
Oh,
about.
that like a common thread through each
I try
podcast?
to be. I try to ask
Nice,
each
nice,
person at least once, what's the purpose of life? Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
And
I
then maybe
mean,
you can make a compilation of everyone's
compilation of
answers.
purpose of life of different people, what they think. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe one day, yeah, we'll just do a compilation of that. So that is something I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. I don't know if you grew up like in a Christian household, but like for me, like growing up in a Christian household, right? It's almost like you assume there is a sense of purpose because there is a God and God's doing something. But for me right now, it's kind of like I guess we don't like to use the word doubt because doubt's like, oh no, it's like you don't have faith anymore. You know, it's bad, bad,
I
bad,
think
right?
it's no, for me it was harder as I got older because that logical part takes over.
Uh-huh.
You're not that naive, emotional teenager, right?
It's not even that. Yeah, I think that's part of it, but you also like you don't want to get for me it's you don't I don't want to get taken advantage of. I feel like faith it's harder to catch someone who's lying, and it's also harder to justify like this is good or this is bad. I guess like Christians don't even like working in terms of good and bad, right? They're like I guess yeah, but
Yeah. No, no, yeah. Ah,
because you hear like preachers who like scam like their flock in a way. It's like
yes,
they're
yes,
getting
yes.
rich while
Yeah,
like the people
yeah,
just keep
yeah.
donating.
There's
It's horrible,
and then there's that too.
right? And
I have
so
a strong opinion about that too, but
yeah, and so it's like why did those people like not see this coming? It's almost I feel like it's they didn't fully understand what faith is, you know, or they had a blind faith in the person. You know, this is why I asked like, is there a difference between God and religion? Because if it was God, I don't think God would do this to people, like cheat people, if the God was righteous, right? But it's
mm.
only like you see like bad behavior in religion because like I think humans are like naturally fallen,
Oh, I
you
understand the
know?
question now,
You
but I already
understand it now?
answered it.
You can answer it again now that you understand it. You know what I mean? We just go back to it. Like you know, like with the history of the Reformation, before the Reformation, like the church stands in between you and God. The church arbitrates for you, right? But then Martin Luther was like sola fides, right? Salvation alone or faith alone. I forgot the exact thing, right? And so each person can come to God, and then that's their personal relationship with God. You don't need someone to arbitrate for you, right? And then revelation is through your time with God. Of course, that creates more issues, and the one like I frequently point out is the Catholic Church rarely divides. You know what I mean? The Pope is the Pope, no matter if he's good or
Mm,
bad. Like it's
mm.
the Catholic Church. It's lasted. With like Protestants, if someone has a different revelation, what's to say that they're wrong, right? They could just say, "Oh,
Mhm.
I got a
Yeah.
revelation from God, and so I'm going to start my own
Yeah.
church."
Yeah. Yes,
And
that's
so the
right.
sin
That's
of
right.
Protestant churches is that they keep dividing. Because why not? You know, if everyone gets the revelation from God, then where is God actually? And that's the problem I'm grappling with. It's like, where is God
Wow.
actually?
Yes. Yeah, I
You
know.
know,
I'm following your thought process.
how
It's
how how do I
quite
know?
complex. Yeah.
How do I know like the church I'm in is correct? You know, and how can you actually say that your church is correct? Does that indirectly mean that every other church is wrong? I don't think so. I don't think it depends what church you're in, but I don't think my church does that. And that it's like we're right, everyone else is wrong. But that's the if some church stands on that or some religion stands on that, I'm right, everyone else is wrong. That's what leads to war and violence because you want to
Yeah.
impose your belief over others. And so I'm just trying to figure it all out, you know. So in the end, it does come down to like if you have to see God
Oof.
somehow, whether through spirit or
Oof.
something, right? Otherwise, like, why go to a church? It's just a social gathering. But at the same time, the danger is if everyone is inspired by God, who's to say who's wrong? You know what I mean?
Right. I wish I had a good answer for
That's
you.
no, I mean
Yeah.
that's just me thinking. And then some people say I think too much, and then others are like, you gotta keep questioning it. So,
No, I
I
don't
mean,
think you think too much because you're being very intentional with um, what you believe. And
that's the only way I know how to do things. You know, it's kind of like question something I see is kind of wrong. You know. Oh, that's the other thing too. Some people say they think more on this podcast than they ever do outside.
oh,
So, I mean,
I
I
can't
guess
believe
that's a good
that.
thing.
I
I
can't
guess
believe
that's a
that.
good thing
Yeah, yeah. No, you're
because I want
encouraging
to pry
people to
below
think.
the
Great,
surface,
great, great.
because there's too much surface talk these days. People are afraid to say like ask genuine things or like pry, like we think of prying as bad because it's like, privacy. You can't talk about this. This is off limits. But
Yeah,
my idea
yeah.
of the truth is you got to keep prying at it. Otherwise, you don't know it's the truth, right? If it's actually the truth, it'll stand up to all the prying. If it's not, and you find a counterexample, then maybe it's not as universal of a truth as people say it is.
I wonder how your opinions will change over the podcast.
I wonder
Because
so too.
you must stand by them very firmly if you're going to, like go out on the internet in front of every single person you interview. You say the same things, or maybe you'll become more loose and you'll integrate other
Maybe,
ideas. I'm
maybe.
very curious. Yeah.
Well, only time will tell, right? Because you see, when I interview people, sometimes people just keep talking. They don't actually care what I think. And that's actually like, okay, that's fine with me. I just get to hear more of what you think. They never
Yeah.
actually ask. Right. But some people, I guess you're more question. You're like, well, now it's your turn, Austin. Like, how do you, right? And so like, how do you think the podcast will change you? And so now I kind of get to share like,
Sorry, you're put
um,
on the spot because you gave me a list of questions that we.
yeah, I'm okay being put on the spot. Sometimes being put on the spot, you say, then you actually know this person's genuine. If you give them, if you prepare beforehand. So this is something I'm thinking too. Should I tell
Ooh.
people like this is generally what we're talking about, or just go in blind? I think some
Oh.
people would struggle going in blind because they need some type of structure. Without structure, they stumble and they just like, I don't know what to say, right? Or they,
Yeah.
they need time to
Yeah.
think more about these deep topics beforehand. Before like that way they could give an intelligent seeming answer or something.
My input on that
Uh-huh.
will be I liked the brief. However, I probably could have done on the fly. I just think that I would give better answers with the brief.
I think a brief is needed too. That's what I've talked with people about. They like the brief because that way it's not like structured answer. It's not just like thinking on the fly. You know what I mean? You've had a chance to think through it and formulate a position you will want to stand on. Yeah, there's a difference between that and just like read off the script. Like I'm gonna say this on the podcast.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think
Yes.
anyone's done that.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to because I shuffle around the topics. You had no idea. It's not in order. It's just a
Oh,
way
I didn't even
to.
notice. Great.
Yeah, it's just
Great.
a way of doing things. But speaking of that, actually, there's a topic we haven't talked about yet. COVID.
Oh, COVID. I
Well,
don't have much to say
we
about
kind of
COVID,
briefly
honestly.
like touched on it, but it was more like just with relation to school and career and all of that. You say you went through school, COVID happened. I think you graduated during COVID, right?
Yeah, I don't have much to say about it. Honestly,
You want to get back to the sense of purpose and stuff like that, huh?
eh, I'll give you my answer. It was terrible in a lot of ways how it stalled society and made a lot of people sick. In my experience, it didn't affect my life too much. Like it actually made my classes easier. They became
Yeah.
online.
You think that's going to lead to a generation that doesn't know what they're doing?
Uh,
Imagine
depends on the grade.
it depends on
Actually,
the grade.
a lot of I would not get such a quality education if COVID did not happen,
Oh,
and
really? Okay.
universities of the mind start publishing their courses for anyone to access. So it triggered this cultural change in that
Ah,
niche.
but like for
Um,
high school, like they're not
yeah,
requiring
I don't think
standardized testing,
it's not good for them.
right? Going into college, you could just turn off your Zoom and not listen. And if you don't know algebra, how are you going to do calculus?
Yes, of course, it's a tragedy and stuff, but I think there's a lot of interesting consequences that
Uh-huh.
happen. Yeah, that I haven't actually thought about this answer
Mm.
very deeply, but I recall just I don't know reading a headline or observing something and it's like, well, this would have never happened without COVID. So yeah, so
I
it's just
see.
interesting. Yeah, I
Gotcha.
wish I had that list. Yeah, those cultural changes from COVID, but oh well.
Well, we're reaching the end of our time, and I think I've exhausted what I wanted to talk about. Is there anything you want to talk about or ask before we call it for today?
Nothing. No, nothing. I have no burning questions. I kind of use the bathroom.
Okay, all right then. So I guess we'll end here for today then. Well, thanks J1 for coming on, and hopefully we'll do another one soon.
Of
Yeah.
course, this was
Okay.
a blast.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.